Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Lit vs. Genre. I am so excited for today's episode. We are finally doing it. Lit is making a showing, and Jeff, I cannot wait to hear your reactions to this.
All the reactions. Yeah, we've decided to do some lit in tandem with the genre that we are doing with Wheel of Time. This is not going to slow down our releases of Wheel of Time. We just want to do this on alongside because, fair is fair, right? We want to, the whole point of this was for each of us to get to read something the other person loved, something that we probably wouldn't otherwise read. And I'm definitely getting the better end of the deal with Steve reading the entirety of the first book of, Wheel of Time, which is much longer than Lolita. But no, I have thoughts. So do you want me to just jump into them? Is there anything else you want to introduce before I say them?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I'm nervous. I don't know if any of our how many of our Robert Jordan fans are gonna come over and check out some Nabokov here, but we did kind of pick this slightly because it is one of my favorites, maybe if not the favorite of mine. But also, we did feel like there were some parallels here between the two, and I think we should make that a big part of it. They both have. Weird intros, a prelude for Wheel of Time.
Oh my goodness!
This forward, which you almost skipped. Did you almost skip it, thinking it was real?
I completely skipped it. I looked at it and I was like, yeah, I don't read those. Then I moved on. I mean, don't get me wrong, if the forward is by someone that I know and really respect, or something like that, or someone that I think might give a unique insight, or if I've already read the novel and I'm rereading it, you know what I mean? And there's a new forward, sure. But like normally, I'm not reading that. But the only reason that I paused to think about it is because you had told me, oh, let's do the prologue or with the preamble and then like the first chapter 2. And obviously if you move to, like as I was doing, if you jump past it, you get to part 1 and I'm like, wait, where's the preamble? Right? Like I don't see a prologue. Right. So then I was like, did you mean the forward? And thus began our journey into the forward.
Good old novel. John Ray Jr. right here.
Oh my goodness. This is one of the most complex reads I have read in a long time. And to preface this, I do teach the LSAT. I do read RC. I even started looking at some MCAT passages recently for like cars. So like I look at things, right? But this, wow, I really felt, I think as you did, with the prologue to Wheel of Time, and that I was utterly lost, and I had to read it like 2-3 times. I was looking upwards, like it was an experience. It was an experience for sure.
So you just mean like the complexity of the prose more than it was what it's describing, or what he's talking about here?
So a mixture of things. One was the style of the prose for sure, and some word choices that I could use context clues to understand, but I was like, I'm here. I feel like I should look them up after a whole glossary conversation about the Wheel of Time, right? I was like, I should use life glossary on these, right? But it did also create an interesting moment for me where, as in a fantasy novel, I would kind of be like, okay, there's a word. I'm going to keep reading, and eventually I'll know what it means. Yeah. Whereas this was more like, I just feel like I should know what it means right now, So like I definitely felt different about it as that sort of reader. So it was partly that, but it was also kind of the why, right? Like and the structure of this, because we kick off right with like, hey, there's these 2 different titles, and obviously the secondary title reveals a great deal more about what's going on. I think. Because, I've read, like, the first chapter of this, like, years ago when you and I were talking about it. So I feel like I knew that Humbert was the name. But then, like, Humbert, I was like, does he not have a last name? Like, that part was very confusing to me with the Humbert. I mean, it's not, when I say very confusing, obviously, like, I kept moving. But at the same time, I was like, but then we get into, like, this friend agrees to do it, and then it's like easier than he thought. But I especially got a little lost with like while Hayes only rhymes with the heroine's real surname, her first name is too closely intertwined. I just realized I didn't highlight stuff. My apologies, everyone. I will be highlighting things in the future to talk about to show for some confusion.
Gotta highlight.
I gotta take the power and highlight things. So yeah, like this, I believe my cursor does show. But like this area with the, as they were getting in through a reread, I figured out that it meant like, oh, that the names have been replaced,
Right.
but not all of them. Or there's one that's like you can't change it, like the Lolita can't change, right? But the last name, because they were like, we need Lolita because it's too critical to the nature of the text.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, okay. But then this part of the real people beyond the true, I was like, you so could not get away with this. Like in a fantasy novel, I feel like fantasy novels do, but then
wait,
a lot of
what?
people hit a wall.
How is this? Wait, hold on. How is this
me.
any different than what Min does? Of just say a bunch of random stuff that you're gonna find out about in the future.
Totally. That's exactly what it is. 100%. But this is like 3 paragraphs in. So I'm like, that's bold. It's bold. I mean, I do get that it has to happen here, right? Because the rest of the story is going to be Humberts, yeah? So, like, this is the only time in this minimal forward, and unless there's other parts where this guy breaks in, right? Where it's like, boom, I'm back. But I don't, maybe if there is an annotated version from this fake forward. But also we need to address the fact that, like, reading it, I didn't know that it was fake. You know what I mean? Like, I was just reading it going like, why am I reading this?
Well, first, can I first say I absolutely love that. I absolutely loved that it's gotten mistaken for a real thing, because I feel like Nabokov was one of the first to kind of do this, where he does these kind of structures where he's kind of faking this verisimilitude, right? Like, and that actually became pretty influential, and like people have done this sort of thing a lot, where you're like, oh, I'm gonna like have this fake forward, like books normally have forewords by some scholar or, you know, editor or someone, and I'm gonna do that whole thing up, you know, just to kind of like sell that this is a real object in the real world, even though it's very clearly not. And that was very influential, and I mean I find pretty fun. And like in some of his other books, I mean, Pale Fire's even more ridiculous. The whole thing is just annotations. Like the entire book is just annotations to a poem that you read right at the very beginning, and then the rest is like each line broken down. And so like he was very into that, and am I wrong to say he kind of pioneered that? Probably. There were probably people who were doing that before, but it's just kind of perfect to like happen upon this and go, oh, I'm gonna skip the boring forward.
Right, yeah, I was just gonna blow past this, and I normally would have, because I mean, the first chapter, in contrast, was a breeze. Like I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like, but this was slog. Like literally after when I clicked to, what was it? No, it must have been this click. When I clicked to this and saw there was this much more, I was like, fuck. Like, there was still this much more this forward for me to read. But to back up, I do like the conceit. I do agree that this idea of a fake forward to create this sense of legitimacy, that what we're about to read is a found object that exists from the real world, I think is super cool. And also, I due to the subject matter of this piece, I feel like, and obviously I feel like this is also going to generate its own conversation, I feel like this was needed, right? Like, I feel like you couldn't just sell a book about an older man, you know, sexualizing a young woman. So it's you've got to get this forward that is basically judging Humbert, basically saying this is a terrible person, right? That I'm now going to let you read. But the way he writes is fascinating, so it's worth it for us to read it, right? So it feels needed for this. And you started telling me before, there's like a story with that, right? That he like was having trouble selling this book or something along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he wrote this as extra for publication reason. Very famously, there is an afterword at the end that is straight up Nabokov straight up talking. And that he was, I think for the American edition, he was asked to do that and talk more about it. And now it's a permanent part of the book. It's in every edition. But we can maybe read it at the end. But this one I think was always part of the design. And I think, and what you said was just kind of, I think, great. Yeah, it's there to kind of, not throw you into this guy's head right away, and it feels like to sort of cut off some of the controversy or people assuming that the author is pro pedophilia or what have you.
Exactly.
But what he does, I think, that's so great in this is like go to the end of it, the very end of this. And this is where he really gets into it, where he's like, in this point of personal study, there lurks a general lesson. And again, you know how I feel about lessons or fictions that's trying to teach me stuff. And I feel like a lot of this attitude I've gotten from Nabokov. A general lesson: the wayward child, the egotistical mother, or the egotistic mother, the panting maniac. These are not only vivid characters in a unique story, they warn us of dangerous trends. They point out potent evils. Lolita should make all of us parents, gosh, this edition is so whack, should make all of us parents, social workers, educators, apply ourselves with still greater vigilance and vision to the task of bringing up a better generation in a safer world. And like you read that and it's impossible to take it seriously, right? Like it's so kind of, I don't know, like it just reads as this like incredible parody to me that Nabokov's going like, I'm kind of making fun of y'all for like, trying to take away moral lessons or like kind of either end of the spectrum. Like I'm making fun of y'all for how controversial this is going to be.
Huh.
And
I mean, well, sorry, go ahead. I'll let you finish.
And, I don't know. I just find that move like, I don't know what it is when I read about it, but it does not sound like, first he's putting that in this character's voice, right? And like, it just kind of, it's hard to tell, like, with all of his stuff, it's hard to tell, like, where the opinion is genuine and where he's kind of doing mockery. And it feels like really in the end, in those lines, that just the task of bringing up a better generation in a safer world, it just doesn't feel like Nabokov's true interest here is doing that,
Yeah, I guess it's tough because obviously I haven't read the book yet, right? So to me, it seems like maybe, right? To me, again, this feels like covering his ass. So like, if he gives this very like positive, larger than life platitude, we can be like, oh, well, he's striving for something really good here, But we should also briefly comment on, there's some weird stuff with the way this is written with the maniac, these. Just as a quick aside, educators apply. I'm sure, people that are watching this and looking at the print. Yeah, this was strange that some words are just like shoved together in this particular Kindle edition. It's unfortunate.
I wonder if specifically it lost the end dashes.
Oh.
Like that's the punctuation they lost. Yeah.
So is that what's missing?
That's what's missing. All the other punctuation is there, but the M dashes didn't make it. And that's why there's no space, because there's no space on either end of an M dash.
Right, of course.
Funny.
Okay, that makes so much more sense. Okay, so whenever I see words jammed together, I'll just think of it as, it's M dashes. Okay, cool. Yeah, because they do seem to be clumped together, which would make sense for an M dash. Mm-hmm. Yep. So anyway, just pointing that out in case readers are like, what is going on with these like weird, it's just a strange thing about this edition. But yeah, in terms of what's saying, I mean, also again, we can see the author like up here going, that makes us entranced with the book while abhorring its author. Again, it feels like the same sort of idea. I mean, and I mean, obviously, again, better having read it all. But this does feel a little repetitive, right? Where the author's saying here, like, it's going to be interesting, but it's okay to hate the author of it. So it's like we get to go in saying, I'm going to hate you, but enjoy it. And it feels like this, maybe thing we're not supposed to do or not supposed to read. and we're sort of getting like the permission by saying it's a terrible person up front. So I do see how this could be, as you say, more of a joke because the author's sort of already given us that same idea, right? Like I feel like the author's already covered themselves right here by saying I'm a horribleness author, so I don't really need to cover it again. So this does, I can see how in that context this does stray into the ridiculous.
Yeah.
But again, in the moment, I did take it as if this person is trying to showcase like high morality or something, you know?
I mean, the other reason I say that, because there is a thing, and maybe it's just my sense of humor, but makes me laugh. And I think made me laugh the first time I read it. It makes me laugh every time since. If you go back to the very first page, very first paragraph, I love, do the senses make sense?
Yeah,
I love that. It makes me laugh every time I read it. And at that point, you're like, okay, we are making fun of this dude. He wrote a book called Do the Senses Make Sense, right? There's like no way we can really take anything he's saying at face value. And
well, wait, is it this guy? I thought his friend wrote this book. And
So this is kind of hard to follow. It's sort of interesting. So in asking me to edit the manuscript, based his request on a clause in his client's will, which empowered my imminent cousin, who is the lawyer. The only reason we know the lawyer is his cousin is because he says my good friend and relation.
Yeah, I wondered why that detail was there. That's what I meant about like some of the. Well, I guess it's writing style, but also structure. I'm like, why am I learning that it's his cousin? It feels like a lot of this stuff is injected to, again, create the reality of the situation, right? But some of it feels like, would this naturally be in a Ford? So some of it did feel a little forced to me. But I also like what you're saying, this mystery, as I talked about in the fantasy book, of being like, okay, how do we learn why this is there or what that relationship is? So please continue. I'm curious to hear the connection.
So Mr. Clark's decision may have been influenced by the fact that the editor of his choice, i.e. me,
so he's referring
had just been awarded the Pulling Prize for a modest work, Do the Senses Make Sense? And then the other thing about all this tortured language is he's making fun of academic forewords, right? He's making fun of these kind of like overly academized. I mean, his prose is going to be complicated. It's maximalist prose. But here he's very good at chameleon-like about kind of like writing this in a certain way that it's overwrought to kind of make fun of this whole idea of how these forewords sound. And then you get the joke, like just the contrast of that, like, oh, we've written this in an intentionally obtruse, like ridiculous way, and then parenthesis, do the senses make sense? Like even just that contrast of that, like really, I explain this in way too complicated a way, and then just like such a simple, goofy joke injected in there. I just love it. I just dig it so much.
No, I hear what you're saying. So there's like I don't know if I go as far to call it an unreliable narrator, but I see what you're saying, that because there is a difference in this prose versus this. Like this felt very clean to me. Like just very. I mean, don't get me wrong. There is some stuff later that it's stylized, of course, right? But it's stylized in, at least with my limited exposure, a way that strays into the beautiful, right? Yeah. As opposed to the unnecessarily complex or tortured, as you said, right? But so I see that forwards are often very dry, and where the person writing a forward is maybe trying to toot their own horn, but introducing someone that's actually more important than they are, right? So they try to really drum up their own importance. Right. So, I see where you're coming from. This is almost, it's satire, right? It's satire. It's a commentary on the time, just as if we watch Spaceballs, it's a commentary on Star Wars. You're not going to fully get it unless you're seeing, unless you've read those forwards and see the comparison or that's happened here. Right. Okay, yeah. And the phrasing there with that the editor of his choice, maybe think he had someone else with his choice, but I see now that it's a way to refer to themselves. And I do also see my good friend and relation, and then empowered by my eminent cousin. Right. Yeah. Fascinating. Okay, yeah, well, I'm definitely all for there being more to unpack. it does. I mean, I guess we had the same conversation with Wheel of Time. I guess it then strays into the danger, right? Like, is this going to stop someone from reading? I feel like no with a forward, because I feel like a lot of people would
Yeah.
just skip it. You know
Yeah,
what I
and you
mean?
could just skip it too. You
Yeah.
really could.
You could, and you could be fine. So this is almost safer than I would say Wheel of Time, because with a prologue, it's like, oh, I'm supposed to read the prologue. I do know some readers that skip prologues. I have seen plenty of people say like, no, I don't even bother. And it's because prologues can often suck or be weird. So yeah, this almost feels safer because people do often gloss over forwards. And if they do read it and it feels tortured, that could be what they expect from a forward. And even if they didn't like it, they would attribute it to whoever wrote the forward and not the author of the actual piece.
And again,
Fascinating.
there's something in, like music where you get such a charge out of contrast. And so finish this and then go into that first little mini section. It is night and day. Yeah,
completely.
I mean, totally different style, totally different. And that just makes this number one part here pop even more for me. Tell me what you think about this thing, because this thing...
It was so short in comparison, right? Because I told you before that I saw this and I was like, oh, no, like why, right? And then you see this and you're like, oh, that's like, what? This is like nothing, right? So no, I do agree. I experienced the exact contrast you're talking about. And yeah, it's like you're flying after this. It's like you're mired in the mud reading through this forward, and then you're just airborne for this. Especially with the darker undertones that we get in this, the idea that this, abhorring its author, to then be talking about to some love, right? It's like, well, wait a second, what's going on? This is almost like what I've said before, that I wish my books could have like a trailer or a, not even trailer, like, but an intro theme, like an anime, because it gives you a preview of what's going to happen. That's what he's doing with this, right? He's giving us a sense of where this is going to go, how we should feel about certain characters. So when we already read Lolita, Light of My Life, Forever Always, we're already like, okay, that's very sweet and sexual, right? But I know this is going to be concerning in some way, right? And then, of course, when he gets into My Sin, it's like, okay, yeah, no, this is definitely the same problem. But obviously, I think what you're talking about is this just gorgeous part with the Lolita and really just focusing on the nature of language, right? And then also doing things that I didn't expect, right? Like, okay, I see him breaking it down. I think he's going to go low and Lolita, but he doesn't. He does low, he does Lola, he does Dolly, he says Dolores. I'm like, I didn't even see some of these later ones coming, but they still seem to fit. So I was impressed by this, that it, not only was he doing something with sound, but he did something with the nature of naming and how we often have, nicknames that will relate. And so there was something fascinating to me about that. Yeah,
I love On the Dotted Line. Okay, this is the official name, right? This is your birth certificate name. Here's your nickname at school. Low in one sock. Why 4'10" in one sock? I don't even know why, but it's just, it sounds good. It just sounds like an interesting sentence, an interesting way to put that together.
Well, it feels like he's giving you a visual right away, right? Because we're getting a concept and then into sound and then into a visual. So I feel like he's touching on senses, not as simple as like, scent, touch and all that, but to a degree with like a sensation, right? And then sound is hearing and then the visual. So yeah, no, it does, especially in the morning, standing 4 feet tall in one sock. You can just see that happen. And again, leading to the concern of like, wait a second, why is she only 4'10"? Obviously some women are very short, but potential problem.
Right.
This was the part that surprised me. I mean, I mentioned that I was surprised by him going to different names here than I expected. But it was interesting to me about this like precursor, right? About like there being someone before. And then we do get into the definition of the girl child Princeton by the Sea. I was not expecting him to go into it as he then ended up doing. So obviously more on that soon.
Yeah.
And then obviously murder, it's like, whoa. Okay, and then Fancy Pro style tooting his own horn, right? We get that he's sassy, so he's a sassy murderer.
Yeah.
So we know very early on what we're getting into.
Yeah.
Which I do think is pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this was just like unbelievable to me the first time I read this just one little part, like how brimming with energy. And like kind of the, again with the prologue, kind of the same feeling. Like I think we talked about it with Wheel of Time, that prologue. Like I was like, I don't know what the heck's going on, but I feel a lot of energy here. I feel like a lot of just injection of you know, pace or excitement. And I felt the same way about this. That you can always count on a murderer for fancy prose style. That line just like blows me away because like it's not really connected to what he was just talking about. It is, you know, foretelling something, and putting that hook in, you know, just really simply, oh, I murdered someone, you know, just letting you know this, so it'll be sitting there for the rest of the book. And then the self-commentary about the fancy prose style. It was just like, how does that even connect to what he was just saying a second ago?
Yeah.
But it just pops. It just makes you go, whoa. Like, it just hit me the first time. And then that next sentence is just gorgeous. Like, look at this next sentence. Where is the verb, the predicate of this sentence?
Oh, who knows? No, but I was surprised there weren't, speaking of M dashes, I mean, I'm glad there weren't M dashes because then it'd be harder to read.
Yeah.
But I thought they would be there. And it, for me, I mean, I will get back to the verb, but for me, this like doubled down on the sassy, you know, as we already talked about, that we get with the fancy prose style, with him then downplaying the serifs, right? These misinformed, simple, noble winged serifs envied. But yeah, because it's not really until we get to look at this, right? I mean, he talks about the Exhibit 1 is what the serifs
so the is
right?
the subject of that, but I love the wait for envied. I just love the wait for it. Like, he makes you wait for that verb so long, and it just is, it's just a great sentence. It just, like, thrills me, that sentence.
Well, that's, I mean, I guess maybe that's why he didn't use the M dash, right? Because that would kind of let you cheat the jump to the verb.
Right, yeah.
Whereas this, it forces you to go through it all to get to the verb.
Yeah.
Because he's used M dashes before, unless he's also trying to show a contrast in style with the style of the forward writer.
Yeah, right.
Which seems possible. I mean, this part obviously strays into the a different style to me, right? Like, up until this point, it's felt very grounded. Even talking about the way something sounds, that just says to me that someone has like sort of a musical ear, if you will. But this last part definitely sounded. It tells me that there's going to be a different prose style than what I've just seen thus far. Thus far, it's been beautifully presented, but in a relatively straightforward manner, I would say. We're talking about, I mean, I say relative loosely, just that we're talking about a girl, talking about somebody who likes, talking about the sea, talking about, you know, some before. But then we get into like serifs, misinformed, look at this tangle of thorns, and it's like, okay, wait, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
And then, of course, it looks like we're going back in time. So it's like we get two intros, really. It's like there's a double prologue almost to this piece, which I find interesting. And to your comment of energy, I certainly felt that. I feel like both give a lot of promises and show that this is a fleshed out world. Like, I believe that this guy's lived a life, that he's got all these different ways he's seen this girl and feels about her, and that he had a life before the girl, right? Especially when it talks about the age. And then we're getting into like the trial, which was hinted at in the forward. So it feels like there's a lot of different scenes, a lot of different things happening, as opposed to just like a single moment. I feel like a lot of prologues are like, oh, I walked into a bar and then, you know, someone got shot and then what's happening now? It's like, it's all very singular, whereas this, I feel, is very expansive. And I think the similar feel exists in Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
Because I love that we don't know who is murdered, right? Is it Lolita? Is it the egotistic mother, right? Is it someone else? Right. Is it himself? You know, whatever. So I think that's really smart. The Nabokov doesn't let us know that, because that can then just sit there, as you said, in the back of our minds for the rest.
Yeah. And that's foreshadowing that, you know, I mean, foreshadowing's like a great genre trick. You want to do it, you know, in genre. And you know, on a certain level, this is a crime novel, right? So it's got like... And it'll become, on a certain level, a mystery novel. Again, always on a certain level, though. Like, it never goes, like, embraces it fully. The those aspects, but it certainly plays with them and indulges in them. And the thing I love about this foreshadowing is that, like, you don't have any question why you should care about that, right? Like, you know right away why this is real bad and why, like, whatever this tangle of thorns is, it's not gonna be good, right? Like, you know right away the stakes are really sky high on this, and that is, I think, a really strong way to do foreshadowing.
Well, I think he's doing both reader hooks. And what I mean by that is we've got a plot reader hook of a double plot reader hook of not just what happened to the pedophile, right? But also murder plus that, right? So we've got these two, really big crimes that we're talking about someone committing. And then the secondary is character voice, right?
Yeah.
We were told that we will be entranced by this book while pouring, and, it's pretty ballsy to say something like that, right? Like, you're going to be entranced by this author. And then I think Nabokov, at least in this first section that I've read, delivers in terms of it is written in an entrancing style, especially, again, in comparison. And so we could also, because the way that this person sees the world or the way they express their worldview is interesting. It's done in a compelling manner. So I feel like he's, firing all guns blazing, right? We've got the plot hook, we've got the character voice hook, and then we're off,
Yeah. Imagine, like, in one of your books, just saying in the fake forward you made, by the way, everybody, this prose is going to be incredible.
Yeah, basically, right? And that's what I'm saying. Like, that's
awesome.
Going for it. I know. I mean, that's crazy. And then to match it, right? And then to even say it again, right? It's not just once.
Right.
The guy writing forward tells us, which is one thing, right? Yeah. But then the guy says it himself, which is, it's wild. Yeah. No, I mean, I can see why you would like this story so much, because it is so confident in its writing, and then it, like I said, so far is delivering on that, and that's quite impressive. It's something a lot of stories wouldn't do.
There is one point where John Ray Jr. has a great line. If you go back one, and this was like where I feel like Nabokov sometimes, and I mean, it might be a slip up, it might be a mess up, but sometimes you just can't help, like, his voice shining through. And that the top paragraph, that last sentence, the caretakers of various cemeteries involved report that no ghosts walk, again, is a great sentence. Is doing a lot of foreshadowing, gives you that ominous tone of it. And it's also in such contrast to what came before. Everything came before just these bullet pointed, here's where this character is now who you don't know. Here's where this character is now that you don't know. And then the caretakers of various cemeteries involved report that no ghosts walk. It's just like, it gives me a chill.
You're right. I did enjoy that line. So there was this moment of enjoyment where I was like, why am I, just as you say, like, why am I reading about all these people that I have no idea? I mean, it definitely gives me a sense of the cast, right? It's a unique way to preview who the cast is going to be. But yeah, no, that last line I did enjoy. And true, if his goal is to fully contrast, that does almost seem like it could be a mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, depending on what his goal is, or if, again, he's stringing you along. Like, if he's worried that you just had to read this brick of stuff you don't know about, but let me reward you with a nice sentence at the end of it so you keep going.
Right. Well, you always kind of wonder whether he wants you to see the unreality behind it, whether he wants these cracks, like, in this edifice of verisimilitude that he's trying to do. And, you could say, well, maybe that shouldn't just even be there, or you could forgive it, quote unquote, by saying he kind of wants an inconsistency there, which maybe is just covering for him, or maybe it's just too good a sentence. Like, when you're sitting there writing it, and you're like, that's staying in, man. I'm sorry, it's too good.
I hear you. It could go either way. I think it needs it personally, but I can see how the argument could go either way for it, for sure. I was going to say with the lines, my favorite is actually this one, A Salad of Racial Genes. This one, the reason I love it so much is because I read a decent amount, but I've never heard this.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a lot of turns of phrases that, people find a new way to do, right? But obviously I've heard of a mix of, racial genes, so on and so forth, but a salad of racial genes just seems so perfect. And I read a lot of fantasy, and fantasy, there could be salads. I don't see why people couldn't say it there, right? But, I have also read some more modern day novels too, but it was just such a fun turn of phrase, especially with a dash of the Danube.
The dash. You're keeping with the salad, right?
Exactly. It's keeping with the salad, and it's moving away from the Swiss and French and Austrian to, and I could be mistaken about this, but like a physical landmark feature, right? And that to me is just super cool. And again, I could be wrong. This is what I did not research, but isn't the Danube River?
Yeah.
Waterway, right?
So
yeah, I love this idea that it's so fascinating of taking a known landmark and saying that that's part of someone's genes. It might, to some people might feel like nothing or like who cares, but to me, especially in keeping with the solid theme with the dash, as you already said, that gave me a lot of trust. And that's what I'm looking for in the beginning of a novel. There's a moment where I get to sit back and relax. There's a moment where I'm like, okay, you got me. I feel it's almost like a safety exercise. I'm falling back into someone's arms or something. It's like, I trust you now. If you came up with something that good, I believe that even if I read something else that doesn't make sense, that you've got a purpose there. There's a reason for that. And so this is going to now allow me to forgive other things I would like. If there's a chapter I'm not as into, or if there's something I'm going to be searching for more of these because it's worth it to me now. So don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed the Lolita part, but I had read that one before. We talked about that one before, but this one I feel like I hadn't seen, and this one this did it for me. This would carry me for like 10 more chapters.
Is it the level of specificity in there that, again, like world building wise, you're like, I'm gonna believe in this world now because these details are so kind of specific?
It's the cleverness. It's the cleverness of it. So for me, there can be different reasons that I would trust an author. One could be the humor. One could be, and humorous and cleverness I find are often tied, right? Tied together.
Yeah.
It could be the plot is just so fascinating. If you're like, oh, there's a 100-person tournament and they've all got to train to get ready for it. I'm already going to read the first at least few chapters just to see, just plot alone, right? But this does the same thing for me. When I'm impressed with a turn of phrase that I haven't seen or I would have thought of, especially with both those, I don't know. It does it for me. And like I said, that would carry me for at least 5, 10 chapters. Well, 10 chapters because they're so short, right? And then assuming I get a couple more of those, then I'm carried another 10 and another 10 like that. And obviously in those next 10, maybe I also get caught by the plot. I get caught by the something else, right? But yeah, I just want to point that out as like my little, wow, that was really impressive.
See, I really dig then the next sentence. I dig this idea of him like popping out of the story to direct address the
This
reader.
was crazy. This is crazy to me.
It's crazy. I love it.
This is just wild. Okay, so obviously, I think we've talked in some other videos. I come from a theater background, so I'm used to the idea of breaking the fourth wall. Right? This is like a Deadpool moment, right? And obviously it's like Deadpool pioneered this. I'm going to try to use modern reference.
Yeah.
But yeah, this to me is something that I would never even consider doing. Right. And it's not the sort of style that a book that I would normally read. But I feel like he does a good job of setting it up previously with the, he's got a couple, right?
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he's talking to us.
Right. Well, the did you have a precursor in oh when?
Right.
Especially the oh when. It feels like I'm having a conversation. So I'm like, oh, okay. And again, I'll take it after that forward. Yeah. I'm like, all right. And then so we get into the ladies of the gentlemen of the jury, and exactly right. Okay, so now we're to jury, but he's going back in time. But then, this is crazy, but it also does work to me in that it says, okay, we're still in the jury. So he's giving an account of his story.
Right.
I don't know, again, if it now makes to me, a promise that he's got to keep going back to the jury, and I don't know if he really will, and I don't know if I really want him to. So, like, I mean, I like the idea, again, but I do wonder how consistent he will be with it. So that's what stops it for me, because that's when it almost worries me to a degree, honestly, in contrast.
Right on. I mean, I absolutely love that. Again, it just, it feels really wild, but then just, like, works
It's in
and
keeping.
is funny, you know, and, like, just has this, I totally dig it. One of my sentences that I absolutely love in this first part.
I did enjoy this next one, though, of his father and two grandfathers who sold wine, jewels, and silk, respectively.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I don't know why, but he just, I like the way it is, but also just the nature of the sentence. It just works really well. You know, so anyway.
It's so
like
complicated. It makes your brain have to do a lot. Go like father,
right.
then first grandfather, then second grandfather. But
right.
then there's nothing confusing about the sentences. Like I never feel lost in his sentences. And I think it's just the pure craft and skill. And how fine honed everything is, that he can be doing really wild stuff, and I still never feel like, oh, I don't know who's talking, I don't know, you know, like I'm confused at all about what is meant.
What I find interesting is this next part where he goes, at 30, I married an English girl, right? But this started getting into the older part, right? And then we got the freak accident, dying. But then he's back when he's 3. So this did, I'm not going to say get confusing, but I did get a little bit of whiplash as we're kind of like going back and forth, because I'm not sure why we jumped to
at 30
he made it. I'm sorry. That's his father. It's his father. So that wasn't the part. It was just, I was reading it. I was like, wait a second. The part, this is why we need highlights. The part that for me was like, why am I learning so much about this like Sybil person, right? Because we got that list of people before, and I was sort of waiting for this moment, because he does bounce around, you know, like he's talking about his dad, then he's talking about the eldest sister, then growing up. But he definitely got me in that I found the place and the nature of how he grew up to be very inviting. This notion of growing up without a mom, staying at basically a resort, right, overseas, and that the people that would come to visit would, you know, like play with him or love him. And then I really started getting into when we talk about his time on the beach with the girl. Like that's when I really started to like fall into the narrative. I feel like the first chapter, I was all about it. The second one felt a bit more kind of like background information as I was kind of ping-ponging around, but it's still relatively short. I did enjoy this part, though, and like I said, I will definitely have highlights next over. This is so hard. I haven't done it from your side before. This is my first time. I'm like, I did highlights, so I know what I'm talking about. I feel like I'm all over the place. I liked this contrast. This part right here, how he's on perfect terms with schoolmates and teachers alike, because I feel like it's setting up that maniac that was talked about before in the forum, right? That like there's someone that seems unassuming, seems perfect, and then does something that's terrible, right? Because right now we're reading about something that seems, I mean, obviously incredibly sad about his mother, but idyllic, right? That he's got this splendid hotel, you know, and these adventures he's getting to have there. So I did enjoy this. And the reason I like it is because I think it's setting up what we were sort of promised, which is this is going to be a sexual journey, right? So it feels very natural that he's going to talk about that. And then get into that was this, it was this picture of the photos. And the reason I'm going to talk about that is I feel we waited long enough to showcase the picture that is used at the front of this. This is your introduction to Lolita, if you purchase this variant.
So you showed me this, Jeff. I went to like cover galleries. There's, you know, like this is a notoriously hard book to design a cover for. And as you can imagine, there are numerous monstrosities over the many decades it's been out. I have no idea where this thing came from. I could not find anything.
Well, it's like you're reading about that part. I'm like, oh, do you mean this picture? Is this what you're saying?
Right,
Because so yeah, I mean, I think there's some potential problems with this as a cover. One, the age does not seem correct.
No.
Two, when we briefly talked about this, you pointed out
this lady's in her early
that is
30s right here. I mean,
yeah,
come
she's
on.
in her 30s, right? Is this mother? Like,
And she's in the Old West somewhere or something.
right, exactly. And then the font. What is the typography that is being used on this? It feels like some slasher flick, Lolita.
Why does
that we're
the
gonna
A
hear.
get smaller at the end?
Why is there so much space between the eye, like around the eye? Like it's so strange.
Yeah, you just
But
see the
this-
LOL like lol. Maybe
you
that's
see-
what it's doing. This is the modern
See-
lol version.
Right? Something. But anyway, yeah, so this, I mean, you get the forward, you get the secondary forward with number one. Like there's a lot of, it's a crazy intro to this world. But then you get the salad of racial genes, you know everything's going to be okay.
What about, let me give you just point out another sentence that I think is just amazing. A solemn, decorous, and purely theoretical talk about pubertal surprises in the rose garden of the school with an American kid, the son of a then celebrated motion picture actress, whom he seldom saw in the three-dimensional world. I
did love this line. Oh, I loved it.
Imagine
that one hit me.
How like the pain that's in there, and a way to say he only sees his mom in the movies. He never actually gets to see her. But just the way, it does so much. It's clever. You're like, oh, that's a clever way to say it without saying, like, say it in a roundabout way, but a way you know immediately what it means. And somehow that also just deepens the emotion. Like if you say he only saw her in the movies, you're like, oh, that's sad. Whom he seldom saw in the three-dimensional world. Why does that make it so much sadder?
Well, it does so much. You mentioned that he's like a Maximus, or like a writer, right? Mm-hmm. And I do see that he's definitely playing with language a great deal, right? And what I think is so amazing about this is it packs so much into a short amount of time. And I think that's why the part one is so impressive, because it also packs so much into a short amount of time. But yeah, because the three-dimensional world, then you imagine you're only seeing her in the two-dimensional world in the movies that she makes. And so your mind flies off into this whole other side quest before you then get back to the rest. But it really tugs at you.
Yeah, it's just a magic trick. I can't really figure out why that makes it sadder somehow, but phrasing it that way just does. And you don't have to belabor it too. You don't get into it. Like, you know what's sad about it. Mm-hmm. I absolutely love it. And speaking of like lost mothers, so I would be remiss not to point out what is famously considered the best parentheses in literature, which is the picnic lightning. If you go back one, the picnic lightning, where the mom dies, and all you get, go up a little right there. My photogenic mother died in a freak accident. Picnic lightning. Which is, when I read it first, I'm like, that's wild again. Like, you could get into this momentous moment in a child's life. You could spend pages, and he puts two words, not even a clause, two nouns, comma, in parentheses, and it's pretty wild.
I did also enjoy this line, save for a pocket of worth in the darkest past. Like, that's all he's got of her. Yeah. Which is kind of,
Yeah. So overall, Jeff, I mean, like, are you hooked with this, or are you? What's your impression here?
So chapter one definitely hooked for sure. Again, I'm curious to see where this style is going to go. I'm like, okay, we're doing something different here, right? Like I said, beginning of two pulls me right back in. This part, there were some moments. Like I said, the pocket of warmth. Having the perfect, I mean, don't get me wrong, there is stuff in here, but it just wasn't as, it felt like
Yeah.
I didn't get it. You know what I mean? Like I didn't quite get its purpose in being there in time, besides giving me some background information, which is fine.
Yeah.
You know, you're writing background information, you're doing it in an interesting way. But chapter 3 is the one that I think does a lot, and I'd like to talk a little bit about.
Yeah.
Before I do get into that, I will say I really wanted to know what the information was his father thought was everything he needed.
Right.
I'm like, tell me, what was everything that you thought you needed to know? The reason I say chapter 3 feels so important is because this is tied to him meeting someone that is, who I'm assuming is the other one that was talked about here. Did she have a precursor? We now learn about the precursor.
Right.
So to me, this was a very important, like, we are progressing the story moment, because it's like, okay, now we're learning the history, and this I want to know. This I'm just as interested in learning as learning about actual Lolita, and I like that there was someone else he was in love with, and the fascinating thing for me in this one is that this one seems fine, right? Because they're both kids, right? And so this one seems perfectly nice, lovable, sort of like what we learned about his childhood for the most part, right? So it feels very much in theme. What happens with this is crazy, though. Not the descriptions and everything. Like, oh, that's fine. I like it that they're trying to, hook. Well, I shouldn't say probably not fully hook up, but trying to, make out when the parents aren't watching, that sort of thing. This I thought was an interesting choice. That they're just kind of like hanging out, talking, and then just like, bam, they're in love with each other. So, obviously different people have different experiences, and this to me, in some ways, rang very true for kids, right? It's just like, suddenly you just know and feel everything as a child, right? And I think that is nice to, especially someone who's older, I'm in my 40s now, like, thinking back and be like, yeah, no, that does seem true, right? But at the same time, it felt like, I don't know, I wanted to know more. I wanted to know was the thing. But again, there's not necessarily a thing with kids. So I liked it, but at the same time, I wouldn't have minded if there was more, but I also get that he's doing it this way on purpose, So this was kind of an interesting moment for me. I do love that he wanted to be a famous guy.
I love the line before that. The softness and fragility of baby animals caused us the same intense pain.
This line is amazing. No, it is. Like, it's the way he turns a phrase. There's just a lot of, there's so much skill there. Yeah. There really is. Like, because anyone could say, like, we both, saying the sentence another way would be completely boring.
It would.
Like, who wants to?
Yeah, you could use, like, almost the same words in a different order, and it's boring. Like, it just doesn't work as well. But something about fragility, intense pain, it just, I don't know. I don't know what it is, man.
It's the same weight that you talked about before, to a degree, in that he's not starting that we both didn't like something.
Right.
He mentions the thing and then tells you how they both felt about it, which just works. Yeah. It just works. So what got me, though, what made me concerned as a reader is this. Months later.
Yeah.
She died of typhus in Corfu. I'm like, what? She died 4 months later in Corfu. So, one again, I think it's a very compelling chapter to me about reading about them, reading about their young love, and obviously seeing how this could shape him. And this was just so dark. Yeah. In comparison. Now, I get that this is going to be about, as you said, basically almost a crime novel to a degree, that there's a murder. And it does, I do understand as well how if there was this thing that almost seemed like perfect love that was then cut off before it had a chance to develop, you could be searching for that for the rest of your life, right? And so I feel that it was just such a hit of like, whoa, this like little girl dies, and just the way it's given to us. Again, I mean, he set it up right where he's set up that he'll say things bluntly, like my mom died, as you said, picnic lightning, right? So he's definitely set us up that I will reveal things in just the most blunt way possible, and you just need to be ready for this. I will say though, just as a reader, I mean, obviously it's also part of the times, right? Like we're coming off the pandemic, during the pandemic, like I didn't even bother to like watch dramas or anything. Like I'm good. Like I only watch like cheerful stuff.
Mm.
And I get that this is not the plot if this is not going to be cheerful, and I
Yeah.
feel that. But I think I was lulled into complacency for a bit.
That's
I feel like
good.
this lulled me into thinking,
Yeah.
like, oh, this is wholesome and fun. We're
Mm.
in Europe and we're falling in love and like cool. And this was just like a hard slap of
Yep.
reality.
Yep.
I would likely put the book down for a little bit right now. Not
Interesting.
saying that I wouldn't want to keep reading, but this is a stop moment for me. This does not entice me to turn the page.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like again I love that hit. Just how out of the blue it is, and
Yeah.
how it just hurts more because it's so out of the blue. You know, like again, if you
Yeah.
lead up to or dropping
Right.
these hints, and even like so. Yeah, the old guy comes out of the sea with ribald encouragement. I love that,
Yeah.
right? You can like see
That's
that.
great.
You can
I
feel
totally
it.
saw
Some
it.
old
100%.
pervy dude yelling at these kids.
Yep.
Comma, and 4 months later she died. And like, not only what it's doing is like, I never got to consummate this. I never, this never came to fruition. And this is the biggest way possible. Like, not only does the death cut them off, but this sentence cuts them off, right?
No,
Like
he's
itself.
recreating. He's recreating for us the feeling,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
Ugh.
and it's no, I mean it's brilliant in that regard in terms of making the reader feel what the character did to better understand them. I mean, and it is reading it. I can't think of a better way to do it. Right? Like reading it this way, I'm not saying I'd prefer that that there is this lead up where he says the reactions afterward and then he gets a letter and then he finds out she died.
Right, exactly.
That wouldn't be better. It wouldn't. And also, I'm not even saying that I want to immediately get his reactions because I don't need them. I know what they are, right? So it's like with the Picnic Lightning, right? Almost like the we get it. Or there was another one we were talking about before. The three-dimensional world.
Right.
I don't need him to spell out that he's watching her on TV instead of seeing her in the three-dimensional. I'm getting to see that, right? I'm getting to feel that, and the same thing's happening right here. It's just that this tells me what this world is, right? And obviously, in the real world, people do die who are young, but also then that gets into like, why do we read, right? Like, what are we reading for as a reader? And so for me, I think that's what the pause is for. And I'm like, oh, how many more of these am I going to face in this book, right? Like, I get one to develop his character, but, I'm concerned now.
Yeah.
I feel like I got to put on protective gear, right? So that's what I'm saying with this. And so that's going to be keeping me on my toes then.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing overall.
Yeah, does that itself seem enticing, though? Like, or you say it's scary, but I like horror movies, right? Like, I like for things to be scary, and that kind of like goes, ooh, I'm kind of... That line gets me turning the next page right away, whereas you're telling me that line gets you like, ooh, now I'm trepidatious about this.
Yeah, I need a moment. I need some time for I can like this. Well, so I don't like horror movies, right? The only horror movies I like are the ones that are humor. Like I love Tremors, for instance, or I love Slither or Gremlins. You know what I mean? Like, or that doesn't take itself too seriously. Like, there's still definitely scary moments and serious moments in those movies, but they're tempered by levity. So that's why I would keep reading this book. If this book was told in a serious way, I would stop. So I like, obviously, like, we're doing this thing. Like, I'm going to read the whole thing because the nature of what we're doing. But I think it's very valuable. This is why I ask you when we're doing the time, like, would you keep reading right now? Like, would you stop? Because I'm curious about those things. So for me, his style and he does have levity in this with the nature of how his just skill with turning a phrase, but there's also humor behind it. Like him, he's intelligent and he knows it and he's using that in a fun way. We all love watching a movie with the intelligent asshole, right?
Right.
Like it's fun, right? And
Right.
that's what we're getting with him, and I get that feeling. I like that. So he does have the balance. That's why I would come back.
Mm.
So it wouldn't drive me as a reader. I would keep reading more despite it,
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I
But
think that's gonna
I get why
be,
it's there.
I think that's gonna be the thing, and we'll we should wrap it up here because there's a lot more book to go. But like I think
Sure.
like it's gonna be, I think people's reactions to this book are about like how much how compelling do you find horribleness, right? And if you
Right.
don't find it compelling, and I guess yeah, it is. There's this. My wife's the same way. She won't watch a horror movie. I can't drag her to one. Me, I can't get enough of them. Like I love it, like
Right.
because it's
Right.
like pure adrenaline, pure kind of just a shot of energy. When
Right.
a horror movie is going well, that I really love that and crave it and want it, right? And so like you tell me
Yeah.
that this book is gonna be like just this, like there's gonna be murder, there's horribleness,
Right.
there's obviously like a guy doing basically like the worst thing that you could do as a
Right.
person. That's compelling to me. I'm like, well, dang, all right, let's read about this, But then I completely understand there's a whole big segment of the population that's like, no, why would I subject myself to that horribleness?
Right, right. Oh, I mean, I'm impressed for sure that he's like, oh, here's a subject that you're not supposed to write about, or you can't write about, or you couldn't make compelling, right? I'm gonna do it, right? I very feels to me like he's taking the bull by the horns and being like, oh, I'm not supposed to do this, I'm gonna, and you're gonna like it, you're gonna read it and enjoy it anyway. And he is convincing me that he's got the skill to do it, right? To present the story, at least present individual sentences in a very compelling way. And I am curious how he's going to win me back. I'll say that because I believe he can, and I'm wondering how he can do it because I almost don't see how he can. Like, I mean, I think he can with like clever prose and going off in another story and creating another character I care about instead, right? Like there are ways, clearly. But I'm curious because right now my mind is kind of drawing blank as to what would interest me next, like with something specific. So I'm curious what he will do. So I'm eager to report back after chapter 4 and see my reactions there.
I just want to put this down. My take on this, and and again to relate it back to our genre side of things.
Yeah, sure.
My take on this book is that and I've been on this a lot going through Wheel of Time, that like, I want to know what the character wants, right? Like I want to know, and it's a classic thing in writing advice, in pedagogy for writing. You gotta have your character want something, and there be obstacles to what your character wants. And what I think he does here, which is absolutely wild, is go, okay, your main character has to want something. I'm gonna have him want the worst thing you can possibly imagine. What obstacles are there to him getting this? All the obstacles, right? Because and then set up the tension. Does like storytelling mechanics still work if you do that? It's like almost like stress testing that storytelling advice. Go, oh, your character has to want something. There has to be obstacles to achieving that. Now, let's flip it around to like the worst thing they could possibly want, where you're not cheering on this person to get.
And you're hoping the obstacles are going to work.
Right? And that's the tension that happens. It's really, and yeah, you'll have to tell me like if it's successful, but I, no matter what, appreciate kind of the gall or ambition of that. Like it's a pretty wild thing to do.
Oh no, completely. I mean, that's what I was getting at with the idea that I feel like he's taking on this thing that, you're not supposed to write about wanting this, right? So I'm going to do it, and I'm going to make you like at least enjoy the character, like I said in the forward, like at least enjoy his writing style, even if you hate him, right? Or what he wants. So yeah, I feel like that setup. I would say that I completely agree with you about this flip of I'm going to give you the goal, and you're actually going to be not wanting him to achieve the goal,
Yeah.
right? It's not a goal you want to see them achieve. So it's like, well, what? I think the other thing that I know we say we're cutting off, but you're bringing in the reason why I feel like this leaves a void at the end of this chapter,
Mhm.
is because up until this point there was something that I could sort of cheer him on for,
Right.
right? Like, you know, he seems to be meeting this sweet girl. They seem like, I mean, yeah, they're fooling around, but it seems pretty innocent. You know what I mean? And it just seems nice, right? And so I can get behind him on this. So that's what I mean. Like the next thing that's going to happen feels like something I can't get behind,
Mhm.
right? So I'm going to need to be either wowed by the way it's described or the prose, or we're going to need some sort of like secondary character who is the obstacle that I can cheer for. You know what I mean? Or something like that. Because exactly,
Well,
we're
I
cheering for
think
that he doesn't surmount the
that's
obstacles,
exactly it. Like, is
right?
I feel like there's a difference between compelling and something to cheer for. Right? You are not going to get something to cheer for. I don't know if that's spoilers, but you are not going to get something to cheer for here in this novel. Does that mean it's not compelling? That I
I don't
don't
know.
want to that I don't want to know what happens. And I feel like I don't need to cheer
Yeah.
for the person. Maybe this is like a weirdness in me, but I don't need to cheer for the person. It's almost like watching, I don't know, like watching
Well,
Tiger
not
King or
always.
something, where I'm like, all
Right,
these people
right,
are awful, but I cannot take
right.
my eyes away from it for a split second. You know what I mean?
No, no, I hear you. I think they're connected, but they're not mutually exclusive for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So like, um, you know, or you know what I'm saying. But the point here is that I do think that it's more standard to have a character with a goal that the reader cheers for them to reach the
Mm-hmm.
goal, right? Because it's like a goal that a lot of people would want, or we can understand people wanting. But I certainly agree that a lot of villains are very compelling
Right.
um, because they have a goal, right? And they can be very good at working toward it,
Right.
even if it's something that's terrible,
Right.
right? But you can appreciate their efforts in achieving it. I think, again, and this ties to what you're saying, is that what this particular person wants. So I'll back up. Like, for example, in what's this show? This is a movie. Anyway, I'll just make it universal. The villain wants to like reduce the human population because of the problems that humans are causing on the earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well,
That was
that's messed
Thanos.
up.
Thanos was
Yeah,
who you
well,
were looking for.
those things. But I was actually thinking from the spy movie. It's a British spy movie. Samuel L. Jackson's the bad
Oh,
guy.
okay, okay.
They made a sequel. Yeah, it's
Kingsman
like
or
King
whatever.
something.
Kingsman.
Kingsman.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kingsman. In Kingsman,
Yeah.
right? So it's like I feel, you know, as if that when we get a villain that has something that is twisted, but you can kind of also agree with those are the villains that I find more compelling,
Mm.
as opposed to a villain that's just like I just want to destroy the world because people were mean to me or something
Yeah.
like that, right? You know, or just to destroy the world, to see the world burn. Like that becomes sort of like a flat character to me. So I think it's tricky. I think that I do tend to become much more invested and interested and find more compelling those that have at least something associated with their wants that I can cheer for and understand. And I do think Nabokov's doing that to a degree with this end, showing this young love caught off. Like I can sympathize
Mm.
with
Mm.
that. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's going to be his in to lean on.
Mm.
That would get some sympathy and interest from me because otherwise, I mean, if I can't cheer at all, then I. I mean, there can be things. There
Yeah.
can be things like if I'm learning about something that I don't know
Uh,
about. Um, you know, if like someone's just so good at something, I'm thinking like, I don't know, a cooking show or something where like you hate the person that's the best, but it's fascinating to see like the dishes they still come out with, even though they treat all the other competitors like crap, right? Like seeing someone being really good in a particular field, a certain level of competency, or maybe their viewpoint on the world still gives some insight, even if it's terrible. So there's ways. So that's what I'm saying that I don't have one on hand that I can just say I think Nabokov's going to do this, but I'm curious to see how he's going to try.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right on. Right on.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited now that we're doing these in tandem, and Yeah.
For sure.
We will get the
For sure.
So now all the Nabokians will come over and start listening to this side of our podcast, is what I'm hoping.
Exactly.
And,
exactly.
And giving you a hard time about your opinions on them.
No, that's the goal. I will say, you know, that's honestly the hope. You know, one of the reasons we're doing this is to share things we love and hopefully get more people into them. Like, I would not be reading Lolita without this, and I'm already enjoying. I'm already seeing things as a reader, as a writer, that are really fascinating to me, even if it's not all my jam. So I'm really glad we're doing it.
All right, everybody. Well, we'll be back next episode. We'll be back to good old Eye of the World, and we will see you then.
Catch you then, everybody.